Hi Macharniks. It's been a little while since we've done a video, but we're right on the edge of a holiday that humanistic Jews often don't celebrate, and so I thought it was worth taking some time to talk about why we might want to commemorate this particular holiday, particularly this year. So the holiday that's coming up really in a couple of days is Tisha B'Av, which marks the ninth of Av, the ninth day in the month of Av in the Hebrew calendar. So Tisha B'Av is historically a holiday when the rabbis and before them Jews living in Judea marked any number of historical catastrophes that happened to the Jewish people, and in specific terms to either Jerusalem or the temple in Jerusalem. So the rabbis tell us that on the ninth of Av in 586 and again in 70 CE, the first and then second temples were destroyed, first by the Babylonians and then by the Romans, on the same day. That may be more or less true. We don't really know with 100% accuracy. We do know that the rabbis say the walls fell on this date, and then the temple itself fell on the next date, and then all of Jerusalem was destroyed on a particular date, and they're all right around the ninth of Av. What these holidays mark that humanistic Jews can use, because we're not particularly concerned about restoring sacrifices in the temple. What we can use from them is what these events mark. And what these events mark is massive displacement of Israelites, Judeans, Jews from Jerusalem, from the historical land associated with the Jewish people, into diaspora, creating refugees, essentially. Creating exiles, creating refugees, creating a major diaspora. And historically, that's very important to the Jewish people because obviously we live in the diaspora. But more than that, it marks a moment where we can look at our own history and look at the situation of refugees anywhere in the world, the situation of asylum seekers anywhere in the world, the situation of immigrants anywhere in the world, and say, we know that. That's part of our history. To me, that's particularly important this year because we face a situation now where, while there were immigration enforcement efforts that were dramatically unfair for the last 20-some years in the United States, the current administration has really stepped up its immigration enforcement, is what they would call it, efforts, creating the displacement of families, creating the separation of families, effectively orphaning children, engaging in widespread, large-scale arrests and raids at workplaces and factories. And we've seen this twice this week, at least, once in Louisiana and another time in Illinois. And the one in Illinois was earlier today. I have a friend who was driving by on vacation and saw the raid happening and took photos and posted them to Facebook, which is how I knew that was happening. So Tisha B'Av gives us the opportunity to exercise the empathy muscle and to say, we know this. This is our experience too. Traditionally, Tisha B'Av is commemorated with fasting and by treating the entire typical traditional Jewish day as though it's been turned upside down. So it's traditional to read the Book of Lamentations, which dates to sometime after the destruction of the first temple and is a poetic meditation description of what Jerusalem looked like as it was destroyed. And it's read in a particular melody that is somewhat melancholy, somewhat plaintive. Lamentations is read. Generally, people sit on the floor or nearly so and read by candlelight rather than having the lights fully on. And in the morning, when people would typically in Orthodox communities put on a prayer shawl, a talit, and put on tefillin, the phylacteries, the leather boxes on the head and the arm, they don't do that in the morning. They do that toward the end of the day, and it reflects a world that's turned upside down. Much of the Book of Lamentations ends up seeming kind of familiar when you think about what happens to people who are rounded up in arrests and persecutions. This is not an unfamiliar thing, and this Book of Lamentations forms a major part of how Jews come to understand their history of persecution historically. Through time, other persecutions get identified with Tisha B'Av, get identified with Purim, get identified with Hanukkah. So traditional Jewish thought views history as not really a straight line and not really a circle, but kind of a spiral, and it keeps coming back. And Tisha B'Av is one of these times where we can let that spiral come back, even as humanistic Jews, and reflect on Jewish history and what it possibly means. And as Abraham Joshua Heschel would have said, pray with our feet. We don't pray with our feet. We just get out there and do the work. And this is a time of year and a political situation in which it might be advisable to get out and do some work on Tisha B'Av. So I hope you'll consider that. And if not, I hope you've learned something about Tisha B'Av.